If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back and we've got the second episode of Laurie Shochat here with us, and I can tell you the first video went over very well. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for all of you who supported that video. If you haven't looked at it, go and look at it now. But now we're continuing. We're still busy with Savannah. Laurie, you're most welcome here. Thank you for your time. Over to you. I'm going to keep quiet.
Hi, everybody. So this is session number 2. And for those of you who may have missed or going to see session number 1 at a later stage, so let me just kind of recap as to where we are. I joined Operation Savannah as part of Battle Group Zulu. Initially, it was just a 2 SAI force that left Kalek and Wakana in mid-October. We then attacked and took over a large town in the south of Benguela called Roshades. Then we saw the passing through of this very, very large convoy of black and white troops that had just attacked and taken over a large town in the southeast of Angola called Pereira de Esh. And one thing led to another, and myself, my sergeant major, and a bunch of about 50 Portuguese or Mozambican, Portuguese, Angolan mercenaries, they call themselves freedom fighters. We joined them, and then over the next week, we went up northwest towards the capital of the south of Benguela called Sada Bandera. We attacked it in a 3-pronged attack, which I dealt with in the video last week. We forced out the MPLA. We took over this little city. We were there for just under a week. And during that week, a separate force of Zulu went down to the southwest to the city of Mosammedes, where there was an MPLA force, and attacked and conquered the MPLA there. And then they came back, leaving a small force there. It was very important to do that because at all stages, we couldn't take the risk of all of a sudden being outflanked. Imagine the Zulu force going up north and all of a sudden a force of Cubans, we're going to touch on the Cubans a bit later, that a force of MPLA led by the Cubans would like land at the port of Mosammedes and then come in right behind us. So it was important to cut that city off. And at the same time, during this week in late October, we also heard about the formation of another battle group called Foxbat to the northeast of us in Silva Porto. It was almost at this very same time because the South Africans had heard about a large force of MPLA that was making their way down in the center of Angola. We were going up from the south towards the west, towards the seashore, and we couldn't take a risk of that happening to us. Generally, we were kind of unaware of this group, but we actually met later because they were there to stop us being outflanked. So this group of Foxbat was also formed during this particular week that we were in Sada Bandera. And as I mentioned last time, and when I finished off, we had driven out from the center of the city out to the airport. Myself and my Sergeant Major Berger, we had met up with the colonel and the commandant who were leading this battle group called Zulu now. We knew that we were Zulu. It was called Zulu because that was our call sign. And I had just been co-opted as the driver, signaler, batman, you name it, of Commandant Kotza. Commandant Kotza was, I believe, an ex-Catonian guy of about 35, a father of kids, and he had specially been called up for this operation. In fact, I understand that he was the guy behind the actual naming of Operation Savannah. This was still back in Pretoria. We had been called up and then sent north. He was the second in command of Zulu. And then also I met up with the Colonel van Heerden, he was actually a farmer from the northern Transvaal somewhere. And so none of these guys actually leading Operation Savannah were, permanent force soldiers. They had just been called upon to serve. They never actually been in formal battles before. Obviously they're trained and very well, but this was something totally new to all of us, including all the officers, junior and senior, and even all the reccees that were with us at the time. So Colonel van Heerden was there with his jeep on the tarmac of the airport. I met his driver, a tall, gingy guy from Johannesburg, Portuguese speaking. This was a requisite to have at least one Portuguese speaking person in our little HQ. So, if anybody had to be questioned or interrogated or whatever, or just to even read the signs, we had that. His name was John da Silva. 40 years later, we still haven't ever found him. I don't know where he is in the world today. So the Colonel had his driver. I became Commandant Kotz's driver. He was probably tired of driving himself. And then there was a small gray Jeep as well, where we had a signals officer as well who had joined us. And that was basically the HQ of Zulu Now going forward. I'm going to give you just a little bit of an overview, very briefly, of what the Zulu force was all about and the makeup of the Zulu force. And to this day, I've never seen one consolidated list of all the members of Zulu. Me, myself, being in the HQ, I actually drew up that list. I remember, the names and the numbers of the people, and I drew up a list. We sent it off to Pretoria. There were no computers at the time, so if you didn't have a handwritten list that we sent with an Air Force plane, they didn't know exactly who was there, what the force was made up of. And I do recall something to the effect of me being, number 130 or so. So there were all in all about 130 white South African troops. They're split between the different units, which I'll quickly try and cover. And then there were about 400 or whatever black troops being Bushmen from the Caprivi, Bushmen from within Angola, and also the FNLA troops, the Fletchers, and other FNLA troops that had been trained. All these guys had been trained for about 2 months prior to Operation Savannah. So the battle group was split into 3 combat groups, essentially. Over time, I got to meet these guys as well. There was Combat Group Alpha, which was under Commandant Delville Linford. So they had a Fletcher battalion. The Fletchers were the black tribe from the south of Angola. There were also the Bushman company, a Bushman company from the Caprivi. There was a Bushman company from South Angola. Then we had the armored cars, the Eland armored cars that split up between these different battle groups. The armored cars came from South Namibia, originally from our base in Walvis Bay, from SAI, and they had been originally yellow cars painted with green as camouflage, and they were under the command of Major Slubbert, who's still around today, leading an organization of all the veterans of Angola. So his unit was actually split between the different battle groups. So his unit was actually called Battle Group Charlie, but in actual fact, the armored cars served both Alpha, which I've just mentioned. So some of the troops were there. I think all in all, there were 5 troops with 4 cars each. So there were about 20 Eland cars. There was a mortar platoon from under Staff Sergeant Gush, also from Walvis Bay. At a later stage, artillery was brought in, but at that time we had no artillery. We had no air cover. We had no anti-aircraft guns. We just had our infantry troops, mortars, and and also these elite armored cars. Battle Group Bravo then was under the infamous or famous Commandant Jan Breitenbach, who afterwards took the troops that were with us, and from there he formed 32 Battalion, the famous 32 Battalion. They came out of Operation Savannah. They weren't around at the time. So he also got some Irland armored cars, and later on also some artillery was brought in. To the north of us, I said that at the time, there was a Commandant Eddie Webb, who actually formed and was the commander in charge of Foxbat. And they also, like Zulu, moved forward and took over about 500 kilometers of Angolan space, going up to Sela and Santa Comba, which a lot of you guys, all the veterans, almost all of you were there at some stage, until about February 1976. Okay, so that's basically the formation that we had. Just prior to us leaving the airport and going north, the Alpha force led by the armored cars, and the armored cars were always leading the attack no matter where. And I must point out the bravery of these guys. We had no advance warning. We were sitting ducks driving up a road, or they were sitting ducks driving up a road, hoping that there were no anti-tank or bazooka missiles aimed at them, because they would have just got shot out. And we had no intelligence as to what was waiting for us. We had no intelligence as to the size and makeup of the enemy at the time. So if I may just recap. Now, we were about to kick off, we were about to go north. The Alpha Force had now moved north already a few hours, if not the day before us leaving north of Sadambadera, and we were going to now move towards the sea. To move towards the sea, it was a few hundred kilometers to the northwest, to the city of Benguela. And that was basically our aim. And just to put some dates into perspective, if I may, the date now when we were leaving Sadambadera was the 31st of October. So if you look back, we had now been in Angola for two weeks exactly, or Operation Savannah was now 2 weeks old. Prior to that, we had been on the border for 2 months, but now actual Operation Savannah was now entering the 3rd week. And in this session, I'm going to cover the next 2 weeks, because I don't believe I'll be able to cover the whole thing in one session, Chris. We'll have to have another one. Okay, so we moved north. We started moving north. This was the first time I was driving this Jeep. I wasn't great at driving in the beginning, and I got shouted at a number of times, changing gears. And we moved off to a town called Kuninges, which was, I don't know, 50, 60, 80 kilometers to the north. That wasn't our main target, let's say. We slept over at this little town. There was no or very little enemy shooting at us, and what there was many hours beforehand had already been quashed completely by the armored cars, and the MPLA forces disappeared. We then moved forward the next morning towards a very large town called Chongaroy. Now, Chongaroy was actually, and I'll try and put a map on behind as I'm talking. Chongaroy was a fairly large town, and prior to getting to Chongaroy, we had already learned that there was a large bridge spanning a river called the Coparola River. And the bridge on this river had been mined. This is information that had come from people who were fleeing Angola. And they knew that bridge had been mined. And we didn't know if they were going to blow up that bridge prior to us arriving, or they were going to spot us, wait for us to be on the bridge, and then blow it up. So a separate force was put together. The whole Zulu force, which was like a few kilometers long, stopped a few kilometers prior to this bridge. A separate force led by Commandant Delville Linford and his Bushman troops, together with Commandant Kotza, and once it's Commandant Kotza, it's me driving. We turned off the main road and did a detour. We flanked this bridge for, like after driving for almost an hour, going all the way around, we came to an opening near the river to a few kilometers from the bridge, and they all unpacked, and off Commandant Linford and Commandant Kotze went off with these Bushman troops towards the bridge to try and surprise the NPLA. I got left back with a couple of the drivers of the trucks that brought the troops and one or two other jeeps in this opening. It was kind of mid-afternoon, and hours went by, 1 hour, another hour. We heard no shooting. We heard absolutely nothing. We heard no explosions. And then it was, I don't know, it was getting late afternoon. It was starting to get dark. And I was the radio guy. My radio went totally flat already. So I had no communication. We didn't know where they were. We didn't know what was going on. And what do we do? One thing I learned in my radio course was that if you put the batteries of a radio, these big green batteries, if you put them out in the sun, they can kind of self-charge a little bit. And that's what I did for like an hour or so. And as the dusk was getting, I put the battery back on, attached it to the radio, and I had a very, very, very small signal, and I heard a faint voice in the background calling us. And our call sign was Zulu 1, if I recall correctly. So where Zulu was the main, was the colonel, and Zulu 1 was us. And it was Commandant Kotze trying to reach us. And I could hear them very faintly. So they told us roughly where they were according to, some large trees and outcrop of, and I started driving towards them. They'd say, go to the left, go to the right. I'm trying to recognize what they're telling me. And after about 15 minutes, there I find in the middle of nowhere, the two commandants on their own, totally, they'd run out of water, no food. They weren't expecting to be out there for like 6 hours. And I mean, for them, I was like a miracle, bringing them water and saving them. And they never kind of forgot that. And I picked them up. And then together with the other drivers of the two trucks that were with us and one or two jeeps, we made our way back to the main road, to the colonel. We never saw the Bushmen. We had no idea where they were. Obviously, they had no communications. And we waited. And early the next morning, we looked along the main road, and we saw this long line of very weary and very tired Bushmen. They were all very short guys, making their way back towards us. They had got lost in the scrub and the bush and what have you. They just got lost, didn't find their way. Where they found us, they didn't actually, they came to the bridge eventually. And they found, apparently in one of the books I read, it was actually the Colonel van Meerden who went out to look himself. And they came to the bridge and they found a fortune of explosives all ready to be detonated. But either the MPLA had run away before detonating it, or something had gone wrong with the wiring, and the bridge wasn't exploded. So that was that, and we all then packed up that morning. We drove past the town of Chongaroy, and then we slept just north of Chongaroy, knowing now that our next town that we were going to try and capture, which we didn't think was going to be anything major, was a town. It was a dusty little village called Katang. A lot has been written about Katang. And this was actually the first major battle that was fought by Zulu with a big force of, we didn't know how large this force was, but a very big force of MPLA that for the first time was now led by Cuban commanders. Until now, we had no knowledge really, well, we hadn't sighted any Cubans, but we were soon to discover that these guys were going to give us a big battle. You may recall in my last session that I met up with a bank manager who came running up to me in Sada Bandera, and he had received notification from a bank in Lobito, Benguela, that a large force of Cuban troops had actually arrived. So we had heard already that there were Cubans around. We just didn't know when we were going to meet them. Unfortunately, also, we had no knowledge of where this force was going to meet up for, and challenge us. They had the advantage that we had spent a whole week inside of Bandera and a few days to get to where we were getting now. So they had almost 10 days to dig in. They had dug trenches along the hills to the west of this town. And those hills were the hills separating the inland from the coastal area. And a force led by, I believe it was Commandant Linford, had made its way around to reconnoiter the hills. They had crossed a couple of river tributaries. They hadn't found anything at the time. Similarly, we then moved forward. Commandant Breitenbach had actually entered this little town already of Katang, and he gave us, the HQ always held back. The HQ and all the support vehicles that covered like over a kilometer of road. These vehicles included the medics, the extra arms, the fuel, the tiffies, you name it, all the different support groups that were needed to run this operation. We had held back, just we didn't want to walk into any trap. And we were given the go ahead. So we moved forward. We were just like 5-6 kilometers away from Katang. We moved forward and there was a crossing in the road that veered off like a T-junction, the one going up north, which we weren't going to take, but we used that road later on to set traps for the MPLA so they didn't come down and attack us from the north. And then the other one went through the town and on towards Benguela. So as we crossed this fork in the road, and you'll see it on the map that I'll show you now, we went off the road into a large open dust clearing, and there was this huge boab tree, a huge tree that the HQ actually made camp underneath that tree. So there we had the 3 HQ vehicles, that's all we were. About 200 meters from us were the Parabat. There was a small little team of Parabats that was our, let's say, protection units in case, anything was needed. We needed some infantry to look after us. There was a dry riverbed about 100 or 200 meters down towards the town. And past that dry riverbed, the mortars actually had put up their position just in case. And the Bravo team, the black troops of Commandant Breitenbach had spread themselves out along about a kilometer from us. Everything was quiet. And then all hell broke loose. These guys were waiting. We had walked into a trap and the rockets started coming. Their mortars were firing. They had already put up some red eyes. I don't know if it was more than 1 or 2. We physically couldn't see them because they were really well dug in, just 5, 6, 7 kilometers away from us. And they were shooting the hell out of us. Now, they didn't see where our HQ was. They couldn't see us. So they didn't really know where we were, but for sure they could see where our troops were, spread out along a whole kilometer. Now, this battle was raged from about 9 o'clock that morning till about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It went on the whole day with non-stop explosions and firing. What we understood afterwards was that our black troops, the guys who eventually would become 32 Battalion, ran away, and also the black troops on the MPLA side ran away. And it's been written about also by the Cubans, because you have to understand that these troops that had been trained for 2 months in the bush, they were guys who just had lived out in the bush. They hadn't even worn shoes. And so they'd been trained to shoot with rifles by us, by our troops, before. But they had no idea what rockets were and explosions. So when these explosions started falling amongst them, the first thing they do was just to drop their weapons and run all the way back. And it was an internal battle by our, white South African commanders, who were all reckies basically, to go and gather them and to force them to go back into battle. Now, at the time, this amazing battle of Katang was not an infantry battle. They had infantry over there. Their infantry all ran away. So it was basically a battle of the armored cars and our mortars against their mortars and their rockets that they had over there. They had a number of different rockets. I'm not going to go into detail, but it is described in one or two books. And our advantage, I guess, and one of the main reasons for us winning this critical battle was, number one, we had vehicles. We were mobile. And this played out in other battles going forward with Operation Zulu in that we were able to move. We were able to move in all different directions. We were able to surprise them, and they were static. They were sitting in one place waiting for us, and they had no mobility whatsoever. The other aspect that turned the coin for us was also basically the bravery of our soldiers, especially the guys in the Eland armored cars. They were being shot at. They didn't see exactly where. It took us a few hours until we knew where to target in. So they were driving up and down, running back. They were running out of their armaments. In no time they had run out of the shells, and they had to come back to the echelon to fill up again and then drive back into battle. They had no sighting. They were driving in totally blind, and one can only guess what was going through their minds. Would they be the next to be like shot out and killed or whatever? And the third aspect, I guess, that turned the battle was not only the bravery of the guys in the armored cars, but also our leaders. It was Commandant Breitenbach who led some of his troops into literally a one-on-one battle 10, 20 meters away from some of the MPLA troops, and shot the hell out of them. And as we regrouped and reforced, and we let's say grouped our teams in different places along the MPLA lines and then behind the MPLA lines, once we knew where they were, Commandant Delville actually took a whole bunch of troops and went behind them to surprise them. All this time, how did us in the HQ know what was going on? And you may have heard the saying, sticks and stones can break my bones. Well, there we were under this huge tree with gravel and ground, and I was told to go pick up a few rocks and stones, and there we were, Colonel van Heerden and Commandant Kotza, and every now and again, it was Major Slubbert and some of the other leaders coming back to the HQ and updating us, or on the radio, where I would be the map guy, myself and the other driver. I mentioned the colonel's driver. We would sit and with the sand, we'd make little hills, and we put some stones where we believe the MPLA troops were, and we put some sticks where our troops were, and we drew roads. And every now and again, we had no information whatsoever. We don't have maps or anything. We had no aerial cover. One plane going over would have solved the problem for us. Okay, but that wasn't provided, not by the South African Air Force at the time. And of course, fortunately, on the other side, they weren't either sending a spot plane, because one spotted plane would have given away everything. Okay, so it was just the blind leading the blind. We were adapting the maps, and they'd come in, the different senior officers, and correct us, and we redesign the maps as the day went on. Also, what happened during this very, very noisy and scary battle, because sometimes those rockets were getting closer and closer to us, that we actually considered packing up and moving out, but we didn't, is that the mortar guys were just trying to find their where the MPLA was shooting from. We didn't have any type of radar or any type of proper mechanism. It was a visual thing. They were shooting, the 81 millimeter mortars were shooting so much that they actually burnt out their two of the mortars just got totally burnt out and had to be replaced at a later stage. Either way, one thing led to another, and we ended up beating the hell out of the MPLA. And at some stage, at about 6 o'clock in the evening, we discovered that they'd all just run away completely. walking through the trenches and the lines, we discovered maps in Spanish. There was we also captured one Cuban, I believe. I didn't see him. And they found, amongst the many bodies, they also found 1 or 2 Cuban bodies. So you could see that, and this was something that brought home to us the fact that the Cubans, it was now South Africa versus Cuba. Okay, this was our first major battle, and there were going to be others going forward. Subsequently, many years later, we discovered that at the time of this battle of Katang, there were already about 1,000 Cubans in Angola. Within a month, and because of this battle and this huge loss by the Cubans, they were airlifting into Angola and also sending by ship. It took them a week or whatever. Within a month of this battle of Katang, there were already 4,000 Cubans in Angola. And within 2 months prior to South Africa actually pulling out, apparently there were already about 30,000 Cubans in Angola, which is, South Africa wasn't going to make Angola their own Vietnam. So we had successfully routed the Cubans and routed the MPLA, but our troops now were very weary. We had troops that had run away, that had to be collected, had to be spoken to. We had the mortars that had their mortar weapons replaced. And we had a lot of admin basically to try and do, and also to report back to Pretoria, give them long lists of what we needed, what we were short of, if it was fuel and if it was weaponry. So we spent the next 2 days under this tree. Our forces rested. We also had to shower and wash ourselves, and there was no way to do it. But some bright guy saw that there was a riverbed. He must have been a farmer. And he took his spade and he went to this riverbed, which is totally dry, and he started digging. And before you know it, we had tens of our troops sitting in these holes that we dug out, because as you dug in, you found water. And that's how we washed, okay? We, each and everyone dug his hole, found his little bath, sat in, and we washed ourselves. A lot of other things were happening around the area of Katang at the time. We sent a force up north. I told you about that fork in the road to cut off the MPLA. We were also in touch with battle group Foxbat, who were north of us. So between Foxbat and this other units that we sent up north, they captured and shot out a lot of MPLA trying to get to us. They didn't realize how fast we were moving, and they had come down from Luanda thinking that they were going to cut us off or attack us from the rear. They had no idea, and we were sitting at the key checkpoints waiting for them to come, and as they arrived, we shot the hell out of them. Either way, 2 days later, everything is now hunky-dory. We've refueled, we've restocked, and we start moving forwards towards Benguela. We go and we cross the reaches of these hills to eventually we start seeing in the distance, we start seeing the sea and this big city of Benguela. On the way, and this just took us honestly, just 1 day, and we're already on the outskirts of Benguela. Along the way, we were leading actually our Jeep, Land Rover, it was a Toyota Land Cruiser actually, was leading the echelon. We had some armored cars behind us, but of course, far ahead of us were the armored cars and the actual infantry troops. And we came across a car that had been blown out in the middle of the road by a 90mm gun of one of the armored cars. They had 60mm and 90mm guns. Now, you don't want to know what a car looks like and the inhabitants of this car being shot out at short range. Unfortunately, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we had body parts spread all over the road, and we actually couldn't move forward. This whole echelon of over a kilometer with all our troops couldn't move forward because we had a car in the middle and we had all these human remains and what have you lying in the middle, and we didn't know what to do. So, I'm a guy who I faint almost at the sight of blood. I can't even watch Grey's Anatomy. But at the age of 19, at the time, I went and I took this shovel that we had attached to the hood of the Land Rover. I took it off. I went out, and you just try to close your ears and eyes, and I just shoveled all these human remains to the side of the road, so we could move forward with battle. And I don't know how I did that. Maybe I closed my eyes, I closed my nose, but it was done. I guess that was the bravest thing I actually did in Benguela. Anyhow, so we make our way up to this main city, port city of Benguela, which was it had the main railway line leading all the way east to Zaire. So if we had already taken over the central part of Angola from Silva Porto and Novo Lisboa and those big cities in the center, with the help, of course, of Foxbat, if we had captured Benguela, we would have an open railway line, which would be amazing to transport troops, armaments, vehicles, you name it. So it was very, very critical. The Cubans were waiting for us. They were waiting for us, not inside the city, but they had parked themselves to the north of the city. They had brought in already down from Luanda additional weapons, especially this red eye 122 mortar, 122 millimeter rocket system that is attached to a vehicle. I don't know if they had one or two or more of these, and they had set them up to the north of the city. They knew exactly that we were going to come in and try and take the airport. Just prior to us attacking Benguela, actually the brigadier, Skuman, had flown in from Rundu to meet up with us and just, update the commanders and get an idea of what was going on. And there was no airport. We were on just a tarred main road leading towards the city. So similarly to what we did when we arrived originally at Ruacana, we got the armored cars to light up. It was already getting almost dark. So they lit up the road with their headlights. And this light plane came and landed on the tarmac on this main road. He was there for just half an hour, met up with the colonel, and I made them all coffee. I was the main coffee guy. And it wasn't just coffee, it already became something called waffle, because we were fortunate every time somebody came in, they brought us a couple of bottles of whiskey and some Castle Lager beers to drink. So fortunately, I was with the HQ, so I had some benefits over there. And I would make them what they called, it was Shochat, make me some waffle. And it was basically whiskey with coffee. It tasted like shit, but they really, that kept them going. So the brigadier arrived and he left, and then the main force moved into the airport to try and take the airport, and another force actually moved into the city. We were waiting outside. There was a crossroads just south outside of Benguela until we got the go-ahead. And as they moved into the airport area, all hell broke loose, similar to Katang, but this time these guys were far more accurate. They had far more weaponry, and they were shooting the hell out of the tarmac, the airport building, trying to get our troops. Maybe God was on our side, because other than see some people being injured and troops being injured, I'm not sure amongst the black troops if any were killed, but no South Africans were actually killed in this attack on Benguela. So the fighting went on, and if you call it fighting, it wasn't similar to Katang. There was no infantry really involved in the fighting. It was purely an artillery duel against our mortars and our mortars, the 81 millimeter mortars, couldn't shoot right across the city to the north. So these 122 millimeter rockets were totally out of our range. The only way to get to them was by the armored cars. And so the armored cars drove through the city. They went around the city as much as they could. And because it's a city with buildings, you can't see, where they're actually shooting from. And the only way to do it was to do it step by step. So the armored cars would slowly move through the city. There was no fighting within the city, but they had to make their way towards where the shooting was taking place. And eventually they managed to pinpoint one or two hills where these red eyes were shooting from, and they managed to start shooting back at them. The red eyes themselves couldn't see exactly where we were because they were under cover of buildings in the city. And at some stage, they just packed up and they ran away. And the city of Benguela was then in our hands. We got the go-ahead in HQ to move forward. We moved into the city, some of the troops moved into the city, and most of us in the HQ actually moved out to the airport, which was just to the south of the city. We spent the night there in this totally dilapidated and blown out building that was once the actual terminal of the airport. There was no ways you could bring a plane in because the tarmac had been totally bombed out. So a decision was actually made then that the next day we'd go straight through to Lobito. So we packed up then as well, and off we went to Lobito. We literally drove into the city, obviously the armored cars and the infantry forces ahead of us. And we basically, the HQ went from one airport straight into another airport. Lobito was a port city very close to Benguela. We drove into the airport. We once again took up our HQ on the first floor of this totally bombed out building overlooking the airport. And because no fighting had actually taken place in Lobito, the runway was fine to actually land planes. So we took over. All the South African forces, the Alpha Bravo forces of Breitenbach and Linford, actually were put outside, and this is going to be a very important point I want to make. Were put outside of the city to the northeast, up on the hills above Lobito. They were stationed out there, out of town completely. And the point I want to make is as follows. In this whole operation of Savannah and this attack within Angola, city after city, town after town, we did not just go and bomb buildings. And I'm speaking at the time as what we're seeing, what's going on in Russia with the Russians in Ukraine. And that's happening now. When we were taking over town after town, remember I mentioned how mobile we were. We had a small echelon. We didn't have this untold amount of armor to just to go and bomb out buildings. So we were not touching buildings. We were not touching civilians at all. In fact, we were staying clear of the civilians because of the huge secrecy around South African troops leading and being involved in this whole operation. The last thing we needed was actually contact with the local population. So you may recall that back in Santa Bandera, the troops that were running the city were actually 50 ELP mercenaries. And the same thing goes for Lobito. Within the city, they didn't see the South African troops. Our troops were outside the city, hidden away. So we didn't go out and kill civilians. We didn't loot. We didn't bomb buildings for the sake of bombing. It was one of the most moral, I imagine, wars that Africa had ever seen. Okay, everything above board. And then, so we were out at the airport. Next morning, all of a sudden, a light plane arrives, unknown to us. No notification. It's obviously not one of ours. It lands and it starts making its way towards our building. We're sitting up in the building and looking down. We've got no idea what it is. So we quickly message out to everybody, hide away. We ourselves hid away. We had no idea. The plane comes to a stop, literally 150 or so meters in front of us. The door opens, and out walk a couple of white journalists, European, or we reckon they were European, with their cameras and their bags, looking around, taking photos already of the building, totally demolished almost, and walking towards the building. What the hell we do? So what happened is that this plane had arrived, probably, we never discovered from where, but probably from the Congo. They knew that there was this big battle going on. They knew that there was this force, unknown force that was coming up from the south of Angola. And nobody knew who we were or what we were. Remember, there were no satellites at the time. There was no, even though, so supposedly South Africa was being supported by the Americans and the CIA. CIA, I want to just also mention that throughout the 2 months, the 8 weeks that we were, Zulu was in Angola from the start to the finish, we didn't meet up with one American. We didn't have any American arms or support or people. Okay, we were totally on our own. So whatever American involvement there may have been in Angola, it was definitely not in Operation Savannah. Anyhow, so here you have these journalists walking towards us, and this whole secrecy, top secrecy aspect of the war about to collapse right in front of us. What do we do? Little Van Gidden has an amazing idea. He says, John, this is the ginger-haired Portuguese-speaking driver. All he is the driver. Go out and meet them and take them up to the hills. We radioed ahead up to the hills, all the South African guys to just disappear. John takes the colonel's vehicle and he drives out towards them. Yeah, I think about 4 of them. And he says, get in. And he says, you know, he speaks to them at first in Portuguese, so they don't realize, okay, that he's South African. Although probably, I don't know how they didn't pick up his Joburg accent, but either way, he puts them into the Jeep and he drives them up to the hills above Lobito. Over there, they meet some of the FNLA and you meet the commanders. They see they're almost all black and they're all local, etc. They interview them. Maybe they took pictures. I don't know. We never ever saw. And an hour or so, they arrive back. John drops them right outside the plane. We're sitting 100 meters from them. They would have had I don't want to think what they would have thought afterwards, that they known that we were right there. And they got on the plane flew off, and everything was okay. That night, actually, I tuned into the BBC because on your radio, you could go from single sideband to, just to regular shortwave. And I actually heard on the BBC News, like an interview with one of these guys who was there, and they asked him, so we hear that, the South Africans are behind this whole battle group that's making its way up in Angola. Did you see any sign of South Africans? He says, no, they were all Portuguese or ex-Portuguese or Angolans. And that really helped us, at least for the next stage, until things got worse and worse. That the world, at least from the BBC perspective, whoever listened in, and probably it was on in the newspapers as well at the time, there was no internet in 75, that South Africa actually was not involved in this whole episode. Anyhow, so that was Lobito. Another interesting aspect of Lobito the next day is that Commandant Webb and some of the senior officers from Foxbat actually came through to visit us. You will see now a photo of Commandant Webb and our commanders sitting inside this blown up building, having coffee together that I served them. And they were just swapping notes, etc. He actually brought with him this this very special little kind of anti-tank gun with these big bullets that we all went out and had and practiced with. It was just something very interesting. I think I have a photo of that one as well to share with you. And we're in Lobito for 2 days. In fact, the next day, myself and John decided, let's go and see the city. And we took our Jeep and we drove down into the city. We drove all along this peninsula, this beautiful peninsula with these amazing large houses, which once upon a time obviously served the upper class wealthy inhabitants over there. We drove all along these beautiful beaches and then made our way back into the center of the city. We parked, we said, let's go walk around the city. It was impossible. We were within minutes, we were surrounded by screaming, shouting, jubilant locals, because this was like the first time we were in camouflage clothing, 2 19-year-olds on our own, no support. And they were so happy to see us because we had kind of saved them, and we quickly drew 2 and 2 together. When we better get the hell out of here. So we drove out, went back to the airport, and now the next stage was going to be put in motion. Our troops have now moved out from the infantry troops, and the mortars had moved out from Lobito to make their way north to Novo Redondo. And the date was now about the 10th, 11th of November. Now, the 11th of November was a critical day for this whole Operation Savannah, because we had, by the 11th of November, kind of a goal to try and see how much of Angola can we take over. Because that was the day that Angola was going to be independent. The Portuguese were leaving, they left on that day, and they basically handed over the key to the management and control of the country to the organization or military or political organization that was running the country. And that was the MPLA in Luanda. So there were jubilant celebrations all over Luanda and maybe certain other parts of Angola, but we had already captured almost half the center and the south of Angola. So Angola basically became independent on that very day that our force moved out of Lobito to move north towards Novo Redondo. The Cubans, once again, were waiting for us. And within a few hours of them moving forward, we already had reports back. Remember, I was also one of the radio guys. We had reports back that our troops at one section of mortars had actually taken a direct hit from their mortars, and the first South African soldier was killed. And this was actually on the 11th, exactly on Independence Day. His name was Rifleman Fento from the 11th Commando, and they took a direct hit. A couple of guys were injured as well. And this was, after 2.5 weeks, the first South African soldier that was actually killed in Operation Savannah. I recently read, just looking up information, that a week later in the Transvaal newspaper, it was written as follows: that Rifleman Fento was killed by a terrorist attack on the border. A terrorist attack on the border. Because of the total secrecy of this whole operation, nobody knew otherwise. In fact, South Africa didn't send up not photographers, they didn't try at all. Not photographers or not video or filming. There was absolutely a total lockdown, as opposed to almost all wars that we see around us in the world and in the past, even World War II, okay? There were always news people or within the actual forces themselves documenting. Operation Savannah, I believe, was one of the most undocumented little wars that ever took place. No cameras, no video, no nothing. If you go onto different websites, until this very stage, we've been in Angola for 3 weeks. If you can get together 12 pictures, it's a lot. And of course, no video whatsoever. So during my talk, I'm going to try and share some of these pictures with you. They're not mine, but at a later stage, I also managed to get hold of a camera, and I'll share some of my own photos with you. So there was no footage video-wise, there were hardly any photos taken. So this took place now with our first guy being killed, some being injured. The mortar unit platoon from Walvis Bay had enough. They asked to be replaced. I mean, these guys went out, if you remember going back to 3 weeks ago in Quebec and Ruacana, we were just told to take some stuff to go maybe for a day or two. And now it was 3 weeks later. These guys weren't being planned on being in a war and being bombed out day after day and every day moving to another place. So the two SAI guys were replaced. They brought in another team of mortars. And then the South African military woke up and said, hey, we've got all these guys up in Angola. They haven't signed documents. Okay, you will recall that, or most of the people watching who were there will attest to the fact that they were given documents to say that they were volunteering to go up into Angola, and they were doing it on their own accord and to their own knowledge, and they weren't going to be part of the South African Defence Force. Okay, kind of mercenaries in a way. we were already in there for 3 weeks, and only then they brought us these forms that we all looked at from the, I think from the colonel all the way down. Everybody just threw these pages away and said, no, it's a little bit late to ask us to say that we're volunteering, okay, just to cover your asses. Okay, so that didn't take place. Our troops were now, some of them were being replaced, and we moved out of Lobito. I'm coming, I think, close to the end of my hour, and we were halfway now between Lobito and Novo Redondo, which was, I don't know, 100 kilometers to the north. And everything came to a stop, because what happened was that amongst the black troops in Bravo, in the Bravo company, they decided, there was a whole internal discussion amongst them, they decided they're not continuing. They've had enough. Keep in mind that these were guys who were all trained very quickly within 2 months, just with rifles, and they were going into some kind of bush war. And here it is, we've been dragging them along for 3 weeks. They've been bombed out everywhere they go with missiles and rockets and mortars. This isn't what they had planned. They also didn't have their leaders with them. They were being led by our own Rickies. And so we had this uprising, and they refused to move. Without that, we couldn't move forward to Novo Redondo. So what happened is that a notification went back to Rundu that, Houston, we have a problem, or Rundu, we have a problem, what do we do? And they flew in their tribal leader, a guy called Daniel Chipenda. And he flew in on a light plane, all dressed in his kind of garb that was, there wasn't just jeans and a t-shirt, it wasn't military uniform, it was tribal uniform with all the beads and everything. Now this Daniel Chipenda, he was actually formerly MPLA. I believe that he was married actually to Neto's sister. So there was a close connection, but they had a big fallout, and he was in charge of the MPLA to the east of, he was the tribal leader in eastern Angola, and he left the MPLA and joined the FLLA. So all these troops that had been trained by South Africa in the southeast of Angola prior to Operation Savannah were his guys. They all belonged to the same tribe. They flew him in. You're going to see a photo now as I'm talking, and they formed up in a big kind of formation. I was standing right there. You don't see me in the photo. Maybe I even took the photo, don't recall. And he came to speak to them. And he ranted and raved for at least half an hour, 45 minutes. Standing next to me was the Zulu, the Zulu HQ as well. I'm sorry about that. And we were watching this whole thing happen. Eventually, the crowds all started jeering and were happy, and he basically convinced them to continue the battle. And off he went. We all shook his hand. He got on his plane. Off he went. And the troops were all, morally, they were now ready for the next battle. And we're going to cover that. We'll have to cover that in the next session, because just one day later, we were going to enter the port town of Novo Redondo, which is where the Cubans actually had blown the bridge just north of that town. And they also blew other bridges in the center of Angola. And essentially, that is what put a stop to the South African advance on Luanda. We were literally, I think, only about 120 kilometers away from Luanda now. So we were really close. Had they not blown that bridge along the Kwe River at that time, and just in advance of us arriving, who knows what the outcome of Operation Savannah would be. So we're going to see you next time, and we're going to cover Novo Redondo. We spent almost a week there, a wonderful week. It was an exotic place. A lot of things happened there at the time, but we got stuck there. South Africa eventually left a force there with my Commandant Kotze in charge of that area. And I then moved together with the remaining force of Zulu. We drove back to Lobito, went inland, and then joined Foxbat, and then Orange had already been formed, and we went to join them at Sela and Santa Comba in the middle of Angola, and that's what we'll deal with next time. So we were now 4 weeks into Angola, exactly 1 month. They had finally put a stop to us, and let's take it from there next time.
Laurie, I think you should have been a history professor, my man. Because really, this is fantastic. I'm sitting here and I'm so impressed. But I have to ask you 2 questions. These vehicles you were driving, were they in good condition?
We had Tiffies, so I don't remember any of these vehicles ever breaking down, not the Land Cruisers that we were driving. I'm sure some of those, cattle trucks that they had collected, etc. Even the armored cars were in constant need of repair, etc. But just keep in mind, I was with the small group of the HQ, so it wasn't that we were walking around all the other echelon, troops and vehicles and seeing everything. They were all kept kind of separately one from another.
Have you had any experience of bush driving before this? Because I mean, the roads, you must have used 4-wheel drive quite a few times.
Funny enough, actually, from Santa Bandera onwards, we were actually driving, if I think about it, the whole way along tarred roads. These were the main roads between the cities in Angola. I'm sure that some of the other troops, and definitely when you get to Sela and Santa Comba, where there were a lot of battles, they were using all these little side roads, and they turned into mud baths because now it was the rainy season that started in Angola. So every day there were hours of pelting rain and mud, etc. But not along that western coastline that we were driving. We were literally on main roads. But when, and it wasn't me, but when our special forces guys were trying to find ways to go across this river where the bridge was blown, they were going off little side roads and definitely using 4x4, and vehicles, even the armored cars, were getting stuck left, right, and center, okay, in the mud.
Okay, have you ever felt threatened by the black troops, that they might mutiny and attack the white leader group?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. We were all in it together. And they knew what they were fighting for. They knew they were fighting for their freedom. Maybe in a way also because they were, Angola was very much split, and the MPLA, FNLA, and Lobito was split across tribal lines. It was for them, it was very important for their tribe to become that which, and so the UNITA was one of the largest tribes in Angola to try and take control of Angola. Although at the outset, I don't believe the troops themselves had any idea really, what the ultimate goal was and what we were trying to achieve. They were just trying to kind of fight for their own freedom and for their own peace. Keep in mind that this civil war against the Portuguese, etc., had been going on for years and years, and they had their own people being killed, and they ultimately were fighting for peace and security.
We'll probably never know because there was so much secrecy. I mean, but man, this is fantastic times to have lived in. I'm just trying to imagine, 19 years old, last year at school, now we're these commandants right in the middle of a war. Man, you were just at the right time.
Now, what I actually left out is that, but I'll get to some. I'll make some notes of little things like anecdotes. When we were at that tree in Katang, eventually a plane actually tried to land, and it was told to get the fuck out of here quickly because we didn't realize that the battle was still taking place. But they came the next day and they landed at some airfield nearby. The pilot came to visit us and he brought some stuff, and I told you some goodies and that as well. I wrote him a letter. I'll share that maybe in the last one. I'll do all little anecdotes. And I wrote a letter in English to my parents because I hadn't seen them for like almost 9 months, and they obviously had no idea. I had disappeared off the map completely, and it's worrying. Think of it as a parent. It's not a week or two, no letter, no phone call. It was like a few months. Is he alive? What's going on? Every other week in South Africa, they were hearing about somebody killed on the border, okay, with no knowledge of that we were in Angola. Okay, so I can only imagine what my parents, let's say, were going through. So I wrote them a letter, and in the middle, I wrote, and now for the Jewish New Year, which had already before, I wrote to them. I've got a copy of it, okay? And I wrote to them, I'm wishing you the traditional greeting, and then I wrote in Hebrew letters, I am in Angola, Aniba Angola, in Hebrew letters. So I know my father and they got the letter, okay, and there were lots of parts that were like scratched out by the authorities, but that part they had no idea. And that was the way that I managed to let my family know that I'm somewhere in Angola. I couldn't tell them, of course, anything more. Whether it helped or not, I've got no idea. But at least I did get that message through. Okay.
Internet, we've come to the end again of Laurie. I must tell you, this man's fantastic. And I really mean every word. I can't wait for the next 2 or 3 episodes. And I'm sure you can't wait either. But I want to ask anybody who's been at Savannah, please come and talk to us. You know, you guys are getting older. It's not a threat. It's a statement of fact. You guys are getting older. Not all of you are as good looking as Laurie here. You know, you have to make this decision to come and tell us what happened, because we don't know. There were a total lack of correspondence. And the stories which came out later, the official ones, I'm a bit skeptic about them. So we need you to come here and tell us about our children and grandchildren, and everyone else can know.
I just want to tell you one thing that, and I'll share with you feedback. But yesterday I did post the link just on the closed group. There's an ops. I'll share with you some of the feedback, and that just a few tens of people so far have seen it. You know, in one day it's the Easter weekend and Sunday, etc. So probably over time more will. And then I will share it with the other groups. There's an open group as well. Maybe you should even join it yourself. And I'll show you what I wrote to them, because they don't know about this group. And a few of them said, oh, that's great to know. I said, listen, guys, there are over 200 videos. You've been doing a great job. And I told them, I said, please contact Chris, be in touch with him, see some of the videos, and you yourselves can come and tell your story, okay? Because there are lots of aspects that I wasn't involved with at all. In fact, most of the people in that group of 630 or whatever people, these are all people who were in Savannah. They check them out before they give them access. And most of them actually went up into Angola when I was already out. So these 2 months that I'm covering are, you know, a lot of them hadn't even arrived there yet. So they don't ask, like, and when they arrived, they had no idea where they were. Many of them were coming in regular South African uniform already, but none of them, or very, very few of them, actually know how the hell we got there in the first place. Okay, and that's basically what I'm covering. Okay.
Yes, that's what we're seeing from the comments as well. People are saying straightforward, they didn't know this. So what we're doing here is history. It's really important.
Yeah.
Not to be done.